It commenced with a tempest. Not the variety that subsides overnight, but the kind that unearths everything the world has attempted to conceal. A German shepherd, composed, disciplined, and decorated, suddenly deviates from protocol and dashes across an airport runway. He persists until his paws make contact with the soil and he begins to excavate as if a life hangs in the balance. Within minutes, aircraft are grounded, lights are extinguished, and security personnel converge in bewilderment. Beneath the concrete lies a sealed enclosure, never intended for discovery. Inside, they unearth whispers from a hidden past, a message incised in steel: he is still alive. The subsequent events halt all flights, unleash secrets buried for decades, and expose a cover-up so chilling it renders the nation speechless. But let us rewind. Lucas Grant is a man who navigates life like a phantom. 42 years of age, a former member of the military, he now serves as the night shift supervisor of runway operations at a major international airport. He resides alone in a silent dwelling, filled with the spectral presence of his daughter, who perished in an airplane accident 5 years prior. He keeps her room untouched, her photographs unframed, and his guilt unarticulated. He relies on order, procedure, and control until a German shepherd named Echo shatters all three as if they were mere paper. What began as a routine patrol evolves into an enigma spanning decades: a voice trapped behind walls, a child long presumed dead, and a dog that refused to forget. Why was Echo digging? What did they leave behind? And why did Lucas's daughter attempt to save a boy no one remembers? There is only one way to ascertain the truth, but be warned, once this narrative commences, you will find it impossible to look away. Rain lashed against the windows of the air traffic control tower, hissing like whispers from the darkness. Lightning fractured the sky with violent stabs of white, momentarily illuminating runway 9L in blinding flashes. Inside the dimly lit tower, Lucas Grant sat alone, his eyes glazed over the blinking lights on the monitor screens. To everyone else, it was just another stormy night. But for Lucas, every thunderclap felt like a reminder of the silence that had followed the last call from his daughter's flight 5 years ago. He hadn't missed a single shift since. Routine dulled the pain, rules kept the grief suppressed until tonight. Outside, Officer Mara Velasquez walked Echo along the perimeter fence. The dog had been calm, unusually obedient over the past few months. She trusted him more than most people. But without warning, Echo halted, ears stiff, body low. Then, in a blur of soaked fur and muscle, he tore off towards the far edge of the runway. Echo, she screamed, running after him, but he didn't stop. His paws hit the rain-slicked concrete and veered onto the grassy buffer at the runway's end. There, he began to dig violently as if the earth itself had betrayed him. Mara reached him seconds later, heart pounding, soaked to the bone. Echo, what are you doing? But he didn't acknowledge her voice, he just kept tearing at the ground as if something were calling from below. Alarms blared in the tower as the breach alert triggered. Lucas stormed out, furious. Control your dog. But when he reached the scene and saw what Echo had unearthed, his rage crumbled. A rusted military dog tag wrapped in rotted cloth, the name barely visible. His voice caught, his breath slowed. Something wasn't right. Something long buried was finally clawing its way to the surface. And the storm had just begun. Echo's paws were abraded from the excavation, his claws darkened with mud and grit, yet he did not cease. Not even when Mara clutched at his collar, imploring him to calm down. She had never witnessed him in such a state, not during bomb drills, not even in search and rescue simulations. His breathing was heavy, his eyes wild. It was as if he wasn't merely digging into the earth, he was attempting to rescue something. By the time Lucas arrived, security lights had illuminated, casting an eerie luminescence across the soaked field. 2 airport officers flanked him. Prepare to restrain the dog. Get him out of there. Lucas barked, waving an arm. But Mara stood protectively between them, holding up her hand. Wait. Just look. Echo had stopped digging, now crouched over something partially buried. Mara leaned in, brushing dirt aside, revealing the shape beneath. It wasn't mere refuse or debris, it was a piece of weathered cloth, tightly wound around a small metallic object. When she unwrapped it, she froze. It was a dog tag, rusted at the edges, the chain still intact but twisted. The name engraved on it was faded except for the final word, Harland. The atmosphere suddenly felt different, heavier. Lucas, for a moment, said nothing. Then he knelt slowly and touched the edge of the tag. His eyes widened, not in recognition, but in fear. Something about it unsettled him. He stood back up, silent. What is this? Mara inquired, but Lucas did not reply. Instead, he looked out towards the far end of the runway where the earth dipped slightly and merged into blackness. That name, he whispered, shouldn't be here. Above them, lightning fractured the sky again, closer this time. Echo sat silently beside the hole, ears raised, body still. He was no longer agitated. He had found what he was searching for. Yet somehow it felt as though this were merely the beginning. The control tower buzzed with confusion. Operators scrambled to reroute incoming flights while red alerts flashed across every monitor. "We've got unauthorized personnel on the runway," someone called out. Orders just came in. "Delay all departures on 9L immediately." Within moments, ground control halted 3 flights preparing for takeoff. Pilots waited in stunned silence, unaware that none of this was due to weather or mechanical fault, but because of a dog that had dug up a name long erased from every record. Lucas stood motionless near the dig site, rain soaking his shoulders as he stared at the dog tag in Mara's hand. His mind raced, but his mouth said nothing. Mara turned to him again. "You recognized the name, didn't you?" But still, Lucas didn't respond. Instead, he took a slow step back. "Clear the runway now." He didn't even wait for confirmation before walking towards the ops vehicle, lips tight, breath shallow. The past he'd buried years ago had just clawed its way back into his world. Back at the perimeter fence, a figure stood alone under a flickering street lamp. Harland, the retired janitor, his old jacket clinging to his bony frame. He watched the flashing lights and the commotion from a distance, unmoving. When Echo had started digging, he'd frozen. Now he was whispering to himself, trembling. "I told them it would come back," he muttered, clutching the edge of the fence. "They never sealed it right. Not deep enough. Not after what happened to that boy." No one saw him. No one heard him. But he saw everything. Meanwhile, Echo remained still beside the hole, his eyes fixed on the soil he'd torn apart as if he were waiting for it to speak again. Mara looked around. No wind, no traffic, no words. Just a silence that pressed hard against the chest. The runway had gone quiet, but not with peace. It was the kind of silence that only comes before something is about to surface. By morning, the air thrummed with subdued panic. Not among the public, flights had only experienced temporary postponements, but behind the scenes, within the airport's infrastructure, inquiries were proliferating like an unchecked blaze. Lucas had documented the event as an unidentified subsurface anomaly, a nebulous designation employed when explanations were lacking and scrutiny was intense. The reality, however, was that no one could account for why a canine had unearthed a decades-old military tag on secured airport grounds, or why the name inscribed on it evoked a response in Lucas he dared not articulate. A forensics unit arrived by midday, succeeded by a portable ground-penetrating radar crew. Mara, still perturbed, remained close to Echo, who had not once departed from the excavated hole. He persisted in sniffing at its periphery, occasionally pawing as if more lay concealed just beneath the surface. When the scanners were lowered into the soil, the findings were immediate and improbable. Beneath the grass and concrete lay a hollow expanse, broad and structured like a chamber. It was not part of any documented utility tunnel or drainage system. Lucas, examining the data, turned pale. There were angles, walls, and, more disconcertingly, airflow. One technician reached into the opening. Echo had initiated and retrieved something peculiar, a rolled fragment of paper, water-stained and delicate. Mara carefully unfurled it, and the instant she saw it, her knees nearly buckled. It was a child's drawing, rudimentary but distinct, a boy with dark hair holding hands with a large dog standing beneath an airplane in the sky. Scribbled below in childish lettering were just 2 words, "Don't forget." Lucas stepped back, his heart pounding more loudly than the distant engines. This was not mere debris. This was not a collapsed maintenance shaft. Whatever lay interred beneath the runway was personal, not solely to Echo, but perhaps to someone who was never intended to be rediscovered. And yet he was calling out. While most of the airport bustled with rescheduled flights and exasperated travelers, the distant section of runway 9L remained cordoned off with caution tape and enveloped in guarded silence. Mara sat quietly on a service crate, Echo resting at her feet, still motionless. He hadn't barked or growled since the drawing was discovered, merely observed the hole he'd excavated as if awaiting further revelations. Lucas had disappeared back into the operations building, making hushed calls, retrieving old records, searching for something or someone. That's when Mara noticed the elderly man again, standing just beyond the fence. Same position, same posture, the same distant, haunted expression in his eyes. She walked over, her boots squelching in the damp grass, and approached him cautiously. "You've been watching all morning," she stated. "Why?" The man didn't flinch, didn't even blink. "They said it was over, that we buried it deep enough," his voice rasped like dried leaves. "But that dog, he knows. They always do." Mara stared at him. "Who are you?" He slowly turned to meet her eyes. "Name's Harlan. Worked here when Terminal 3 was still new. Before the fire." Before the silence, she frowned. You knew about what's under there? He nodded. I was there the night they closed it. Heard the banging, the screaming. No one listened. They poured concrete right over it the next day. Said it was structural damage, but it wasn't. There was a boy trapped down there. I tried to speak up, but they threatened me. Said it was national security. His voice cracked. I still hear it. The knocking. Mara's stomach lurched. A boy. Harlan stepped back. You should stop digging. That's not just a hole. That's a grave someone didn't want found. She turned to glance at Echo, who was now sitting upright again, ears sharp, eyes locked on the dirt. Something inside Mara twisted. Harlan's voice, now barely a whisper, drifted behind her. You don't find the dead unless they want to be found. The radar team operated in near silence, crouched beside the excavation site with their portable scanners emitting a soft hum. Data streamed in slowly, dense layers of earth-reinforced concrete. Then something distinct appeared, a cluster of symmetrical lines, geometric, unmistakably artificial. One of the engineers pointed at the screen. There's a structure down there about 12 feet under. Lucas stood over his shoulder, arms folded, jaw locked tight. He had seen classified infrastructure schematics before, but this, it wasn't on any blueprint, not even the archaic ones from decades past. What is that? Mara inquired, her eyes fixed on the shape. It's a chamber, the technician stated. It has walls, angles. This wasn't part of the original foundation. Lucas muttered something under his breath and walked away, dialing someone on his phone. Mara could hear fragments. No, it's active. Yes, I saw the tag. It's back. We need clearance now. He ended the call with trembling hands. That's when it occurred. Echo stood abruptly, bristling, and emitted a deep, guttural growl so low it seemed to vibrate the ground. He darted towards a nearby crack in the runway, one that had gone unnoticed until now. Without hesitation, he began pawing at it, frantic and wild. A low sound rolled through the air like thunder, but not from above. The earth itself rumbled. Everyone froze. Cracks widened across the tarmac like veins splitting open, and the runway shifted slightly underfoot. The scanner technician shouted, "It's unstable. The whole corner's sinking." Lucas grabbed the radio from his belt. All flights grounded now. Lockdown 9L. Sirens illuminated the sky in a pulse of red and white. Teams scrambled to secure the area, but Echo didn't budge. He stood at the widening fracture, tail high, staring into the blackness below, and then a sound emanated from underneath. Not a quake, not shifting rock, but a single hollow knock, followed by another, and another, each one perfectly timed, as if someone were still knocking to be let out. The excavation crew arrived at first light with heavy machinery, their vehicles idling softly beside the now fractured runway. Lucas signed the emergency clearance documents with a trembling hand, fully cognizant that this action would initiate an internal inquiry. Yet there was no option to retreat. Something beneath was not meant to be there, and Echo had rendered it impossible to disregard. Within the hour, concrete slabs were dislodged one by one, exposing corroded rebar, crumbling earth, and ultimately, an aperture. Not a natural void, not a sinkhole, but a sealed stairwell. The air that surged out was cold and musty, carrying an odor that did not belong to soil, oil, or fuel. It smelled of time, lost time. Mara descended first, with Echo at her side. Lucas followed, accompanied by 2 engineers and a backup medic. The staircase was narrow, hewn into concrete that had weathered like bones under duress. At its base, they encountered a steel door, dented and aged, with faded yellow lettering barely discernible across its top. Containment B. Do not unseal. It was not locked, nor was it powered. It was merely closed. When they pushed it open, it emitted a prolonged groan, as if something were exhaling after years of holding its breath. Beyond the door lay a chamber, a forgotten room. Inside, rows of corroded oxygen tanks were scattered, some still connected to plastic masks that had melted from heat. Cracked tiles adorned the walls. Metal cots stood in eerie formation, as if awaiting occupants who never returned. One cot bore a nameplate partially incinerated, yet one word was legible: Harland. Mara froze. That's the name on the tag. In the corner, beside a toppled file cabinet, lay a child's drawing pinned to the wall. A stick-figure boy, a large dog, and a runway with an airplane flying overhead. Beneath it, scrawled in jagged letters, likely with a rock or metal shard, was a sentence no one wished to read. "He is still alive. Don't leave me here." Lucas stepped back, his heart hammering. The oxygen in the room felt scarcer by the second. Echo growled, his gaze fixed on a collapsed section of the wall. He approached slowly, then began to bark. Louder, faster, sharper, because behind that wall, something moved. No one uttered a word as Echo stood rigidly before the crumbled wall. His bark had transformed into a low, trembling whimper, a sound Mara had never heard from him previously. The others exchanged uneasy glances, yet none dared to venture closer. Then Mara perceived it. On the wall opposite the broken concrete sections, scratched deeply into the metal paneling with something jagged and crude, were the words, "He is still alive. Don't forget us." The edges were rough, the strokes desperate. Whoever had inscribed it had done so not for discovery, but in hope, the kind of hope that diminishes slowly as days meld into weeks, and weeks into years. Lucas stepped towards it, his fingers trembling as he reached out to trace the letters. The tips of his gloves brushed against the metal, but he did not complete the touch. His hand fell back to his side. "This wasn't just some accident," he murmured. "This was deliberate." The team remained silent. They did not need to speak. Everyone sensed it. The narrative they had all believed about Terminal 3's fire. The rumors of construction mishaps, none of it was true. In the corner, beneath a partially buried cabinet, something glinted. Mara knelt and carefully reached for it, extracting a rusted bracelet, small, likely worn by a child. She held it up, wiping away the dirt. Lucas's breath hitched. His legs wavered slightly as he stepped forward and took it from her. "I've seen this before," he said, barely above a whisper. He pulled his phone from his pocket and opened a photograph, one he kept locked away privately. It was his daughter, Claire, a week before her flight crashed. In the photo, she smiled at the camera, sunlight illuminating her face. Around her wrist was the exact same bracelet. Mara's face turned pale. "Are you saying your daughter?" Lucas didn't answer. He just stared at the rusted band in his hand as if it had just shattered everything he thought he knew. And across the chamber, Echo growled again, not just at the wall now, but at something behind it that had begun to knock. The air within the chamber had become still, so still it felt unnatural, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Echo stood inches from the collapsed wall, tail rigid, ears pricked forward. Every muscle in his body was tensed in a silent state of alert. Then the sound came again, a knock followed by another. Rhythmic, intentional. It wasn't the settling of debris or the shifting of the foundation, it was a pattern, a message. Mara dropped to her knees beside the rubble, placing her hand on the cold stone. Her voice was soft, trembling. "Hello?" She pressed her ear closer. "Is someone in there?" For a moment, there was nothing. Then 3 knocks, fast and urgent, followed by a pause. Then 2 more, then silence again. Echo barked sharply, then pawed at the debris as if attempting to dig through it himself. Lucas crouched beside her, his eyes darting across the wall's structure. "This wall, it's newer, reinforced. Someone sealed this section off more recently than the rest of the chamber." His voice cracked with disbelief. "They didn't just trap someone down here, they hid them." His mind spun with possibilities, but one kept persistently surfacing. What if the knocking wasn't new? What if it had never ceased? Mara shouted louder, "We're here. Hold on." Her voice echoed back, hollow but defiant. One of the engineers stepped forward, alarmed. "If we break through the wrong way, it could collapse the whole chamber." Lucas stood up, his voice steadier now. "Then we find the right way." But what haunted them all wasn't merely the idea of someone still alive behind that wall, it was the deeper, heavier fear. What kind of person survived that long without being found? And why had Echo, after all these years, returned to this exact spot at this exact time? As the knocking started again, louder, more desperate, Mara turned to Lucas, her voice trembling. "Who did we leave down there?" Echo just kept barking. The knocks were indistinct at first, gentle and consistent, like the reverberation of a heartbeat buried deep within the Earth's core. 1, 2. Pause. Then again, a rhythm too deliberate to be a shifting pipe or the groan of an old structure. Everyone in the chamber froze, their ears straining, their breath held captive in their throats. Echo emitted a sudden bark that resonated through the metallic shell of the subterranean space. His body pressed low, his eyes fixed on the fractured wall. Then came another knock, louder, closer, an answer. Lucas's voice, cracked and parched, barely formed the words, "That's not possible." Mara stepped forward instinctively, dropping to her knees and pressing her ear to the wall. The cold metal stung her skin, but she didn't move. Her pulse thundered. Behind the wall, breathing shallow, strained, and then scratching. Not random, not erratic, but a pattern. Someone was there. Someone was still alive. Get the wall open, Mara commanded, her voice shaking. Now. The team hesitated. One of the engineers protested, "We don't know what's behind that structure. If we break it wrong, it could cause another collapse." But Echo let out a howl that silenced the room. It wasn't panic, it was grief, recognition, mourning, and urgency fused into one single sound that pierced the soul. Lucas didn't wait. He grabbed a crowbar and slammed it into the fracture line. Once. Twice. The metal groaned and dust fell like ash from the seams. "Help me," he growled. Mara joined him, then the others. With every strike, the air grew heavier, the space felt smaller. And then, from inside the wall, just as they paused to catch their breath, a voice. It was faint, dry, a whisper more than a word, but it was there. "Echo." Mara dropped the crowbar. Echo's body trembled, his ears pressed flat, his tail motionless. Slowly, he stepped forward, placing one paw gently against the wall. And from the other side came a sob, a human sob, fragile, desperate, the kind of sound one makes when the world finally answers back after years of silence. That evening, as tempests once more swept across the horizon, Mara sat in her flat, her laptop open, files strewn across the table, news articles, echoes, records, scanned images of the bracelet, and the child's sketch retrieved from the chamber. Every indication pointed towards something more profound, something concealed beneath official accounts and polished deceptions. She accessed Echo's original intake record, and a single line captured her attention: handler Captain Thomas Ridge. The name resonated like an echo from a bygone era. She entered the name into every government database she could access. Nothing. Not a single record, not even a retirement notification. Then, just as she was on the verge of abandoning her search, her phone illuminated. Unknown caller, no ID. Her thumb hovered before she answered. "Mara," a gruff voice stated. "You weren't supposed to find him." Her heart stopped. "Who is this?" "You already know," the voice responded. "I trained Echo. And if he's digging, then something went very wrong." She gripped the phone tighter. "Where have you been? Why is there no trace of you?" "Because I was erased, just like the others." Project Helix wasn't just training dogs, it was pairing them, bonding them with orphans pulled from classified rescues, kids no one would miss. Jude Harland was the most promising. And Echo wasn't just his partner, he was his only family. Mara's breath caught. Jude. That was the name on the grave. The voice continued, urgency creeping in. Helix was shut down after the Terminal 3 fire. They told us Jude died, but we never recovered the body. They didn't let us search. They sealed it. And now Echo's gone back. Yes, she confirmed. He found the place. He found Jude's tag. We found a drawing, a chamber. There's someone knocking behind a wall. There was a prolonged silence. "You need to listen carefully," the man finally said. "If Jude survived this long, he won't be the same. You're not just uncovering a child, you're unsealing a memory they buried for a reason." Then the line went dead. Lucas stood in the doorway of his daughter's former room, the silence pressing in as it always did. The air still held faint traces of her perfume. Photographs were taped to the walls, a blue notebook lay on her nightstand, she never permitted him to read it. He hadn't entered this room in over a year, not since the day the airline sent him her final possessions. But now something within him stirred, something beyond grief, a connection he couldn't disregard. He stepped in slowly, his fingers brushing across her bookshelf, the spines of her favorite stories, the framed certificate from school still sitting crookedly on her desk. Then he opened the drawer. It resisted at first, jammed from time or tension. With a small jolt, it slid open, and inside, nestled beneath layers of folded paper cranes, was a scrapbook, handcrafted, meticulously assembled with washi tape, old glue, and affection. Lucas opened it, flipping past doodles, school photos, pressed flowers. Then he paused. One page had a Polaroid affixed to the center, a picture he didn't recall. His daughter stood outside the terminal, smiling brightly, but beside her was a boy in a blue jacket, a German shepherd at his side. The boy's expression was weary, worn, but his eyes were locked on Echo. Beneath the photo, his daughter had written, "I'm going to help him, even if no one else will." Lucas stared, his heart frozen. He hadn't known this boy, never heard his name, yet somehow his daughter had met Jude and never told him. Why? When was this? The day she boarded the plane? Had she gone back into Terminal 3 that day? Not because of luggage or a wrong gate, but because she was searching for him. His mind reeled. The pieces no longer seemed like coincidence. The bracelet, the drawing, Echo's return, it was all converging on the same truth. His daughter hadn't perished in that crash without purpose. She had died attempting to save someone no one else remembered. The facility was meant to be closed, padlocked, and derelict after the government withdrew its funding years ago. Yet the rusted gates yielded too readily when Mara pushed. Overgrown vines twisted along the fencing, and fractured security lights lined the cracked pavement like silent sentinels. This was where Echo had undergone training. She had only heard tales of it, a top-secret program that paired elite K-9s with specialized handlers. But the more she investigated, the more those narratives bled into shadows and silence. The main training edifice was dark and stale, dust clinging to the air. Shelves were bare, cabinets left empty. But down a long corridor, behind a decaying door, Mara discovered something untouched, a storage room. Inside were rows of file boxes, some water-damaged, others still sealed. She rummaged through them until one box halted her abruptly. Project Helix Handler Sync Reports, confidential. Her heart thudded. Inside were files containing photographs, timestamps, behavioral analyses, dogs, children. One page detailed a pairing. Subject: Echo, German Shepherd, ID 1129. Handler: Jude Harland, age 10. A photograph was clipped to the page. Jude, pale, thin, with haunted eyes, and a small, fragile smile as Echo sat beside him, tail curled tightly, his head resting protectively on the boy's leg. Not merely a working pair, but a bond, a connection stronger than any leash. Mara swallowed hard. She flipped through the remaining pages. Experimental methods, psychological assessments, phrases like emotional imprint detected, and advanced empathy synchronization. But it was the final notation that shook her. Warning: Echo will retain trauma memory. If subject loss occurs, Echo may attempt to return to origin point. Mara sat back, the weight of it all crashing down on her. Echo hadn't just remembered. He had obeyed his last connection. He had come back for Jude even if no one else had. The chamber had grown frigid, excessively so. Even with lights strung along the ceiling and portable generators humming faintly in the background, something about the air felt amiss. Echo was no longer barking, but he had not departed from the wall, not even once. He remained positioned, ears twitching at sounds no one else could perceive, his body taut like a string pulled to its breaking point. It was unnerving to observe a dog renowned for his calm composure begin to unravel without warning. Mara stood nearby with a small parabolic microphone borrowed from the forensic team. They had chuckled when she requested it, but after everything they had witnessed, no one was laughing now. She aimed it towards the sealed section of the wall where the knocking had first commenced and adjusted the frequency range. Initially, there was static, but then, beneath it, a high-pitched tone. Repetitive, faint, like a whistle, but not any whistle she recognized. Echo's head snapped towards the sound the moment it filtered through the speakers. His body began to tremble, not in fear, but in recognition. Lucas approached, frowning. "What is that?" Mara stared at the audio levels, which had started to spike. "It's not feedback. It's controlled like a beacon or a signal." Then something unexpected occurred. From a pipe embedded in the far corner of the chamber, an old, sealed vent, a whisper drifted out, so quiet it barely registered. "Is someone there?" The air shifted. Echo whined. Mara's hands went numb. Lucas moved slowly towards the vent. "Hello?" he said softly. Silence. Then the whisper again. This time clearer, a voice fragile, trembling, but human. "Echo." The entire chamber fell still. It wasn't a memory. It wasn't a ghost. Someone was calling for him. And somehow, despite everything buried, Echo had heard it first. Lucas hadn't experienced dreams in years, not genuine dreams. His nights were typically void, submerged in silence or memories too agonizing to revisit. But the night following the whisper, the voice calling for Echo, he awoke in a cold perspiration, breath heaving, heart racing. The images remained seared behind his eyelids, too vivid to be mere imagination. Flames licked at steel beams, Thick smoke coiled through narrow hallways. A boy's voice screamed from the darkness. Not random, not general, but specific, familiar. He could see the boy's face, covered in ash, pressed against a glass panel as a security door slammed shut. Echo barked furiously on the other side, being pulled back by someone unseen. The boy kept pounding on the glass. Lucas felt it in his bones. Knock after knock, growing weaker. And then silence. He jolted upright. Felt like a memory, yet he knew it couldn't be. He wasn't present when Terminal 3 caught fire all those years ago, wasn't even assigned to the airport yet. So why did it feel like a memory? Why did it feel personal? Later that morning, as Lucas approached his truck to return to the site, he noticed something peculiar tucked beneath the windshield wiper. A burnt page, crumpled and faded. He opened it carefully. It was part of a diary, childlike handwriting scrawled across it. He said the dog would come back for me. They said he wouldn't, but I still hear him bark. If I stay quiet, they won't find me. But Echo will. He promised. The signature at the bottom, J.H. Lucas's fingers trembled. No one knew he was having those dreams. No one had access to his truck. So who left the page? And why now? He looked down the runway where Echo sat near the collapsed chamber wall, staring at the sky. Something inside Lucas fractured. He wasn't merely pursuing a mystery anymore. He was being drawn into it. The chamber walls, once lifeless and gray, had begun to murmur their own truths. Mara couldn't dismiss the image of the whispering vent or the high-pitched signal only Echo seemed to comprehend. Everything indicated something more than mere abandonment, something calculated. She returned to the subterranean chamber alone that evening, flashlight in one hand, a crowbar in the other. Echo trailed closely behind her, never leaving her side. She paused at the far end of the chamber, where the paint had cracked in thick, webbed lines. With each chip she scraped away, a layer of secrets yielded. Beneath years of neglect and grime, a shape began to emerge, something deliberate. A triangle, perfectly symmetrical, surrounded by faded red lines, and inside it, two symbols. A dog, and beside it, a small child. She stepped back. It wasn't mere graffiti. It was an insignia. She snapped a photo and sent it directly to Captain Ridge, not anticipating a response. But the reply came almost instantly. Just 2 words. You found it. Moments later, her phone buzzed again. Another message, this time longer. That was the Helix containment seal. If it's still visible, then they never finished decommissioning the site. And if Echo's reacting, that means the emotional imprint is still active. He remembers the boy, which means the boy might still be alive. Mara's hands trembled. All this time, she had believed Echo's instincts were merely reactions triggered by sounds, scents, echoes of his past. But now she understood. He wasn't reacting. He was following something, a connection, a promise. She turned to Echo, who was now pawing at the ground beneath the insignia. Not just anywhere, but the exact center of the symbol. That was no coincidence. It was a map, and Echo had already chosen the next place to dig. The deeper Lucas and Mara delved into the identity of Jude Harland, the more the world around them began to contort. What they anticipated discovering was a tragic addendum, another nameless victim lost in a forgotten conflagration. However, the name Jude Harland was not merely absent from public records. It had been intentionally expunged. Hospital logs indicated a boy admitted in 1990 during a classified emergency extraction, malnourished with visible indications of war trauma. His age was estimated to be 10, his name redacted until a faint scan of an original intake form revealed it. Harland, J. There was only one adoption request on file bearing a woman's name. Lucas stared at it for a prolonged period. Caroline Grant, his late wife. He recalled now how she had volunteered at the airport's trauma shelter during refugee processing, how she had once spoken of a boy with sorrowful eyes who remained silent but always stayed near the dogs. At the time, Lucas had dismissed it. We can't save every stray, Carrie, he had said. Yet she had filed for adoption anyway. Mara sat beside him, the silence between them heavy. She was going to adopt him, wasn't she? Lucas nodded slowly, the weight of it crushing. But the fire happened. They told her he didn't survive. A new understanding was forming, one darker than either of them wished to confront. Jude wasn't merely a forgotten boy, he was nearly family, someone Caroline had attempted to save and someone to whom Echo had once belonged. They checked the shelter logs. Jude had never been released. No transfer, no burial, no listed guardian, just a dead end. Except Echo had remembered him. And Lucas now realized, with a sting sharper than grief, his daughter might have known too. What if Claire had discovered the truth? What if she went searching for Jude? What if the crash wasn't merely a tragedy but a consequence? And Jude, he wasn't just left behind, he was deliberately removed from the record. The orphanage stood on the city's periphery, concealed behind faded trees and corroded fences, the kind of establishment most people passed without a second thought. Lucas hadn't returned here in decades, not since the day his wife attempted to bring Jude home. Yet, walking through those gates again felt like stepping into a memory he hadn't earned. Children's voices echoed faintly in the halls, but a coldness pervaded the air that didn't originate from the weather. They were guided into a quiet wing reserved for long-term trauma patients. The nurse, an older woman with weary eyes, motioned them towards a small room at the end of the hall. "He doesn't speak," she said softly. "Not since he was brought in 3 years ago. We don't know where he came from. He was found wandering the edge of the old airfield, alone, disoriented, covered in soot and blood. But he won't say a word." Inside, a boy sat on the floor, no more than 10 years old, his back to the door. Crayons were scattered around him and the walls were covered in drawings, dozens of them, all depicting the same scene. A German shepherd, rendered in red, black, and brown, always engulfed in flames, always barking at a wall. Mara stepped closer, stunned. "That's Echo," she whispered. The boy slowly turned. His eyes met Echo's through the doorway, and for a moment the world stopped. No fear, no hesitation, just recognition, deep, aching recognition. Then the boy whispered the first word anyone had heard him utter in years, "Jude." The nurse gasped. Lucas knelt down, showing the boy a photo of the dog tag, the bracelet, the drawing from the chamber. The boy reached out and touched it, then looked up at Lucas and said softly, "He waited. I heard him. He never stopped." And then he began to cry, not like a child, but like someone who had held too much silence for too long. Jude was alive. Maybe not the Jude they remembered, but he was somewhere, and still waiting for Echo to finish what he started. The cemetery was tranquil, enveloped in the kind of profound coldness that seemed to extend beyond mere sound. Lucas and Mara stood before a weathered headstone, faded and chipped at the edges, yet still decipherable. Jude Harland, born 1980, died 1990. A small, inconspicuous plot situated in the back row near the tree line, forgotten, devoid of flowers or visitors, merely a crooked marker bearing a falsehood etched into stone. Lucas stared at it, arms crossed, his knuckles white. He was 10 when they said he died. Same age as Claire when she first saw Echo. Same age as the boy at the orphanage. They just copied and pasted a name onto a tomb. Mara knelt, brushing leaves from the soil. "Do you think anyone even buried him here?" They did not require an answer. The records had been falsified, no autopsy, no witness testimony, just a blank file and a closed case. When they examined the grave's documentation, the paperwork led them in circles, signatures that didn't match, missing transport logs. Even the listed funeral director had been declared deceased 2 years prior to Jude's supposed death. Mara reached into her coat and retrieved a small handheld sonar scanner, one borrowed from the forensic crew still stationed at the runway. Slowly, she moved it over the grave, static, stone, dirt, nothing underneath. No coffin, no casket, no remains. Lucas stepped back, his voice a whisper. "It's empty." Echo approached from behind, nose to the ground, then stopped at the foot of the headstone. He sat, lowered his head, and emitted a low, mournful whine, one that shattered whatever small hope they had retained that this was all merely a misunderstanding. Echo knew. He sniffed the soil once more, then did something that stunned them both. He began to dig, not wildly, not like before, but slowly, purposefully, as if to convey, this is where the truth ends and something else begins. Because Jude wasn't resting here. He had never rested at all. The security section of the airport was quiet when Lucas arrived, excessively so. After the events that had transpired over the preceding days, knocking from sealed chambers, a whisper through the vents, the name Jude repeatedly surfacing, he required proof, tangible evidence, something the board could not disregard. If Jude had survived and if Echo had been returning to him all along, then footage must exist. The cameras near Runway 9L were among the most advanced in the state. They never ceased recording, or so he believed. He entered the server room, nodding at the night staffer behind the desk. "I need to pull footage from Runway 9L, last 48 hours, infrared, thermal, sound logs, everything." The technician frowned. That's strange, he muttered, typing into the system. It shows no data for that section. He clicked again. There's a gap. Nothing from the past 3 nights, just blank. Lucas leaned in. Blank as in deleted? The technician nodded, his eyes narrowing. And not just deleted, rewritten. Someone with admin clearance covered the entire drive with noise files like they wanted to ensure no recovery was possible. Lucas's blood ran cold. Who possessed such access? The screen blinked. The staffer clicked again, then paused. This can't be right. A single access code, a clearance level Lucas didn't recognize, one that hadn't been utilized since the fire at Terminal 3. It was then that a folded envelope slid across the desk from behind. Lucas turned to see a man in a maintenance uniform, a stranger. Take this, he said under his breath, not meeting Lucas's eyes, then forget I was ever here. He vanished before Lucas could respond. Inside the envelope was a flash drive and a note. They left him. It's all on here before they erased this too. Lucas looked up at the dark monitors, his heart pounding. Someone had already attempted to erase Jude once and they were trying to do it again. But this time, they weren't swift enough. The quietude did not endure. By the subsequent morning, black SUVs lined the airport's restricted entrance. Men in unmarked suits moved through security as if they owned the premises, their badges unfamiliar but commanding respect. Homeland Security, they announced, National Emergency Protocol. Every department was instructed to cease operations until further notice. The atmosphere shifted, apprehension replaced bewilderment. Orders were barked, files were confiscated, and suddenly everyone was under surveillance. And then he arrived, Agent Gavin Rhodes, cold-eyed, precise, the kind of individual who never posed questions because he already possessed the answers. He encountered Lucas in the operations hallway with a handshake that felt more like a monition. We're here to ensure your airport doesn't become the next headline, Rhodes stated, calm and clipped. This incident has escalated beyond your jurisdiction. Lucas did not flinch. What incident are we talking about, Agent? Rhodes offered a thin smile. The one you're not qualified to manage. Mara arrived moments later, Echo beside her. The instant Rhodes stepped closer, Echo's demeanor altered. His hackles rose, a low growl rumbled from his throat, deep and instinctive. Rhodes didn't even blink. Control your animal, he said flatly. He's never reacted like this, Mara remarked, observing Echo closely. Lucas noticed it then. Just beneath Rhodes's shirt cuff, a faded tattoo, nearly hidden, a triangle with a dog and child inside it, the helix symbol. Rhodes followed his gaze. Some programs are better forgotten, he muttered. That's when Lucas knew. Rhodes wasn't merely a cleanup agent, he was part of the very entity they had unearthed. Not just a witness, but a keeper. And now he was here to ensure that whatever Jude left behind remained buried for good. Lucas no longer trusted many individuals, but he trusted Mara and Mara trusted Echo. That was sufficient. So, when the encrypted flash drive from the anonymous man illuminated his laptop screen, he didn't report it, didn't log it in, he simply watched. The footage was not pristine, grainy, distorted, but what it depicted struck harder than anything he had previously witnessed. A timestamp, 15 years ago. A sealed hallway, smoke ascending, alarms shrieking in the background. The camera panned across a bunker tunnel, then locked onto a child, Jude, small, terrified, slamming his fists against a thick glass door. He was yelling something. A voice came through the microphone, Echo. Echo, don't leave me. But the most devastating part, Echo was there on the other side of the glass, barking, lunging, attempting to reach the boy, his leash held tightly by an armed handler. The handler turned, dragging Echo away. Jude screamed louder. Echo fought back, nearly pulling the man off his feet, but the door slid closed between them. The video flickered and cut to black. Lucas's hands clenched the desk, his breath caught in his throat. They left him, he whispered. They left that boy behind on purpose. They had to locate the original server. Mara led the way, recalling old rumors of a redundant data vault beneath the terminal, a room supposedly sealed after the fire, the kind that didn't exist on any modern blueprint. They slipped past Rhodes's men during a shift rotation, following a disused elevator shaft and a compromised ventilation path. At the end of a narrow tunnel, behind a rusted panel, they found it, the hidden server room. Dust-covered towers still blinked softly, forgotten but operational. Inside were backups, logs, footage from cameras that had long been declared destroyed. And sitting in the middle of the desk, untouched for over a decade, was a burned photograph of a boy and his dog taped to the screen. It was labeled, Echo Unit, Last Sync, Classified. Lucas stared at the screen. They hadn't merely erased Jude, they had constructed a system designed to forget him. The fire-damaged shell of Terminal 3 loomed like a forgotten artifact, its windows boarded, its entrances chained, and warning signs plastered across every doorway. Danger, condemned. Most believed it had been gutted after the explosion, its contents cleared, and its foundation repurposed. Echo, however, showed no hesitation. As soon as his paws touched the scorched tarmac outside the barricaded terminal, he stopped, nose low, body rigid. Something had drawn him back here, not curiosity, but memory. Mara and Lucas pried open a rusted service door that groaned in protest, revealing a stairwell choked with soot and silence. They followed Echo inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The deeper they ventured, the more unsettling it felt, as if time had ceased here. Emergency lights still blinked red in the distance, flickering like dying stars. At the lowest level, behind a collapsed hallway and a wall of melted lockers, Echo began to dig, not frantically, but with precision, as if he knew exactly where to go. His paws struck metal, a hidden elevator door. No power, no keypad, just a sealed shaft long buried in concrete and oblivion. Lucas and Mara worked in silence, peeling back panels, rigging old battery packs until the mechanism hissed faintly. The doors creaked open, revealing a rust-covered lift. They stepped in with Echo, the silence engulfing them as the elevator groaned its way down. When it stopped, they were met by a long corridor, colder than the rest of the building. At its end stood a vault-style door, its edges blackened by heat, the number 3B barely visible beneath layers of grime. Inside, they found a chamber unlike anything they had encountered. Walls were lined with photographs. Children paired with dogs, marked by dates and codes. Some had red stamps across their faces. Sudden failed. Others were left blank. And in the very center, illuminated only by the flicker of their lights, was a photo of Jude and Echo, untouched, unlabeled, as if someone, despite orders, had refused to mark him as forgotten. Mara whispered, "They preserved it, hidden in the wreckage." Lucas nodded slowly, a chill creeping through him. They hadn't just buried Jude. They had constructed a tomb around his memory and sealed it with silence. They ventured further into the chamber, each breath growing heavier, as if the very walls resisted their presence. The space was vast yet suffocating, lined with broken terminals, overturned desks, and stacks of metal lockers that hadn't been opened in decades. But what stopped Mara cold wasn't the technology. It was what hung from the far wall, illuminated by the flicker of a half-dead emergency bulb. A drawing, childlike, faded, yet somehow untouched by the fire. Scrawled in waxy crayon on wrinkled paper, still clinging to the scorched concrete by melted tape, it depicted 3 figures. A boy in a blue jacket, a man with dark hair, and a dog beside them, ears pricked, tail curled, unmistakably Echo. Behind them, rendered in pale yellow and orange strokes, was an airplane. Beneath the figures, a caption in shaky handwriting, "I'll be brave if you come back." Mara stepped closer, her breath trembling. The man resembled Lucas, younger certainly, but the likeness was uncanny. She turned to him slowly, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Lucas? Did you know Jude before this?" "No," he said quietly, staring at the drawing. "But my wife did. And maybe my daughter did too." She looked back at the crayon figures. This wasn't merely a memory. This was a message, a snapshot of longing, a plea drawn by a child who had crafted a fantasy from the scraps of kindness he'd been shown. Jude hadn't just been waiting. He'd constructed a world where Lucas would return, where Echo would come back, where everything he lost in fire and silence would be restored. Mara swallowed hard. "He never gave up." Lucas nodded slowly, his voice breaking. "And he remembered us. Even after all this time, he remembered." They looked at each other, the realization sinking in. This was no longer just about finding a lost child. This was about answering a promise that no one had ever intended to keep, except one dog, who never stopped trying. As they stood in the flickering quiet of the chamber, Echo moved again, slowly, deliberately, towards a section of the far wall that appeared more intact than the others. It was smoother, cleaner, without fire damage. He sniffed once, then let out a short, deep bark, then again and again. Mara turned to Lucas. "He's signaling." They moved closer. At first, it looked like just another wall, but upon closer inspection, There were signs. Scratches, fingerprints, worn grooves near the edges. A narrow seam ran along the left side. A hidden door. Lucas found a panel embedded beside it, almost invisible beneath layers of grime. He wiped it clean. A keypad. The lights were dead, but the door wasn't sealed by power. It was sealed by fear. Mara knelt and placed her ear against the steel. For a moment, nothing. Then a knock. Faint, slow, timid, followed by another. And then a voice, barely audible, raspy, like someone who hadn't used it in years. Echo, Echo. The air left Mara's lungs. She reached for Echo, who stood frozen, ears forward, body trembling. Echo, the voice whispered again. Is it really you? Lucas staggered back, gripping the wall. It wasn't possible. No one could survive this long. No one could. But they had. Mara called out, "We're here. We're opening the door. Hang on." Another knock. Then silence. The weight of everything struck at once. Every search, every clue, every thread pulled through lies, loss, and buried truth had led to this moment. Echo stepped forward, pressed his paw gently against the door, and let out a low whine. And from behind the steel, a soft sob, the kind that only comes from a child who's finally, after years of darkness, realizing they're not alone anymore. Jude was alive, and Echo had brought them all back to him. At the terminus of the corridor, concealed behind a tattered blackout curtain and a corroded supply shelf, Echo halted. He did not bark, nor did he growl. He simply froze, his body motionless, ears erect, eyes fixed on a section of the wall that appeared no different from the remainder. Yet Mara recognized that posture. It was the stance Echo adopted when something significant was at stake, when something was alive. Lucas stepped forward and moved the shelf aside. Behind it was a panel, larger than the others, bolted shut at its edges. Faint dust covered its surface, but when Mara ran her sleeve across it, she uncovered something beneath. A tiny, worn keypad, inoperative due to lack of power, but still intact. Looks like it hasn't been touched in decades, Lucas remarked, attempting to pry it open. Echo whined. Then a sound soft, barely audible, yet unmistakable, a knock. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. Echo barked once, sharp, immediate, and pawed at the base of the panel. Mara stepped closer. Is someone there? Silence ensued. Then, barely louder than a breath, came a voice. Echo. Mara's breath caught in her throat. It was a boy's voice, weak, raspy, but not just alive, aware. Echo, the voice repeated, trembling now. You came back. Lucas stumbled back, his eyes wide. That can't be. The voice on the other side sobbed. I waited. I stayed. They said you wouldn't come, but I stayed like I promised. Mara fell to her knees, placing her hand on the cold surface. We're here now. We're going to get you out. Echo pressed his body against the panel, resting his head at the bottom corner, refusing to move. Muffled cries echoed from within, not just fear, not just pain, but relief. After all these years, someone had answered. And behind that sealed wall, Jude was still waiting, alive. And Echo had kept his promise. Rhodes was not far behind. The moment the backup generator in Terminal 3 flickered to life and the sealed vault responded with a faint hiss, Homeland Security agents were already mobilizing. Lucas and Mara did not have much time before the full force of government suppression descended upon them. None of that, however, mattered now, not when they stood before a door that should not exist. The airport blueprints showed nothing beyond sublevel B, yet here they were, facing a steel passageway flanked by old biometric locks and a rust-stained plaque, half erased by time, Emergency Containment, Echo Unit. It was not merely off the official records, it had been designed that way, integrated into the foundation before the terminal even opened. Lucas stared at the schematics on his tablet again. No record, no signatures, just a blank section that every inspector had overlooked. How many had stood on this very floor, oblivious to the fact that beneath their feet, a child had been left to fade? A whisper passed through the vents again, weak, fading. Please. Mara's hands moved faster, ripping open an access panel beside the vault. Wires, relays, old coding interfaces. Whatever sealed this chamber was no longer digital, it was analog, mechanical, something even Rhodes's team hadn't deactivated, because to do so would mean acknowledging its existence. Echo paced nearby, circling the floor, stopping at a metal grate where he pressed his ear and let out a single bark, not frantic, not panicked, but calling. Lucas touched the vault. It was cold, colder than the rest of the room. A strange vibration passed through his hand, soft but real. There was life on the other side, barely, but it was there. And then they heard the worst sound imaginable, explosives from above. Controlled detonations, a collapse being triggered. Rhodes was sealing the terminal, not just to stop them, but to ensure no one ever found the truth again. They had minutes, perhaps seconds. And behind that door, Jude's voice broke once more, almost silent. "Don't leave me again." The ceiling quaked as the deep, dull impacts of the initial collapse resonated through the chamber. Lucas and Mara both flinched, dust raining down from widening cracks above them. The terminal was being sealed, interred, just like the truth they had fought so arduously to unearth, just as Jude had been. Rhodes was not attempting to rescue anyone. He was endeavoring to complete what had commenced 15 years prior. They had to act now. Mara jammed her crowbar into the panel's locking seam while Lucas scrambled to reroute auxiliary power through the bypassed wires. The door refused to yield. It had been welded shut from the outside. Echo barked furiously and began to excavate at the lower edge, claws scraping metal, leaving streaks of blood in his urgency. Then the second blast struck. The ground tilted. A concrete slab broke loose from the upper corridor and crashed onto the walkway just behind them. The shock wave propelled Mara forward. Her leg caught beneath a fallen pipe. A sharp cry tore from her throat. Lucas ran to her, his hands trembling as he attempted to lift the heavy beam. It wouldn't budge. Echo spun, seized her jacket in his teeth, and pulled with an unexpected strength. Lucas added his weight, and with one final heave, they freed her. Her leg was bleeding, but she waved them off. "We don't leave him," she gasped. "Not again." Lucas looked towards the chamber door. The temperature was dropping. The oxygen monitor beside the lock was flashing red. A slow beep. Weak vitals. Someone was still alive, but not for long. Then Echo stopped. He stood motionless, ears locked forward, body tense. A sound from within, breathing, ragged, shallow, and then a knock, barely more than a whisper of sound against steel. 3 soft taps. Echo whined. Lucas pressed his palm against the door. "Jude, we're here." From the other side, a faint, trembling voice. "I knew you'd come back." There was no more time. If they didn't break through this wall now, the entire terminal would collapse, and Jude, after all these years, would be lost again, this time forever. Everything surrounding them was pandemonium. Crumbling walls, obstructed vents, and the roar of falling steel reverberating like thunder through the depths of Terminal 3. Yet, in the midst of it all, inside the battered survival pod, time appeared to suspend. Jude lay curled like the mere shadow of a boy, his thin limbs trembling, lips cracked and parched. His skin was pallid, clinging too tightly to his bones, but his chest rose slowly, weakly, yet undeniably alive. For a moment, Lucas and Mara couldn't articulate, couldn't move. They simply observed as the impossible materialized. Echo inched closer, pressing his head gently against Jude's side. The boy stirred, his eyes fluttered open. Not wide, not bright, but aware. He blinked once, twice, then focused. "Echo?" he rasped, his voice barely a whisper, yet imbued with something deeper than recognition, relief. Mara's throat constricted. She knelt beside the pod, placing her hand on Jude's shoulder. "We're here. You're safe. We found you." But Jude wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on Echo. "You didn't forget," he said, his voice breaking. "I knew you wouldn't." Lucas crouched beside them, overwhelmed. "How? How did you survive?" Jude attempted to answer, but a weak cough interrupted him. "It was dark for a long time, but I heard him in my dreams. I kept hearing Echo. I stayed quiet like they told me, but I never stopped waiting." Tears welled in Mara's eyes. She brushed a strand of hair from his face, her fingers trembling. "You're safe now, Jude. You're going to make it." Another groan echoed from the crumbling walls. The building wouldn't hold much longer. Lucas wrapped Jude in an emergency blanket from the pod and lifted him into his arms. Jude didn't resist. He kept one hand stretched out, reaching for Echo. The dog moved beside them, never breaking contact. Jude placed his small hand on Echo's fur. "You came back," he whispered again. Echo let out a soft, breathy sound, almost like a cry. And in that moment, everything else disappeared: the fire, the past, the cover-ups, the silence. Because against every odd, after all the years, through darkness and lies and abandonment, Echo had found his boy. And Jude was still breathing. The footage disseminated more rapidly than anyone could manage. By the time Lucas and Mara emerged from the wreckage, carrying Jude in their arms, Echo limping faithfully beside them, the sky above the airport was already illuminated with news helicopters and flashing lights. Every reporter, every bystander, every online stream captured the moment the boy, whom no one believed existed, was pulled alive from a sealed government vault. Rhodes, however, was not observing the sunrise, he was watching his world disintegrate. Inside the command tent, he barked orders, demanding shutdowns, jamming signals, blackouts, anything to regain control. But it was too late. The encrypted footage had already been uploaded, the whistleblower's flash drive copied and mirrored across the globe. The truth had slipped through his fingers, and the public now had eyes on everything. Lucas didn't wait for permission. He marched straight through the security line, flanked by media, Echo at his heel, Mara pushing Jude's wheelchair behind him. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward. And in the center of it all, Lucas tossed a folder onto Rhodes's table. It slid open, containing surveillance screenshots, classified Helix documents, voice recordings, and the footage of Echo being pulled away from a screaming child engulfed in flames. "This is the boy you left," Lucas stated, his voice trembling. "This is the dog you tried to erase. And this is your signature authorizing the shut-in protocol." Rhodes didn't deny it. He simply looked at the cameras, his face rigid. "We did what was necessary. You can't understand what we were protecting, what was at stake." "You weren't protecting anyone," Mara snapped. "You were hiding your failure. And you buried a child alive to do it." A murmur of shock rippled through the reporters. Rhodes stood, adjusting his tie as agents closed in behind him. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "we never expected the dog to remember." Lucas looked down at Echo. "He remembered everything," he said. "That's the difference between your world and his." Rhodes was escorted out moments later, surrounded not by respect, but by the weight of everything he had tried to conceal. The world, however, had already decided. The truth belonged to Echo now. The nation awoke to a tempest unlike any it had previously witnessed, not of wind or fire, but of truth. The footage of Jude's rescue saturated every major network by dawn. News anchors struggled to articulate what they were observing. A boy presumed dead for over a decade, extricated from a concealed chamber beneath an airport runway, clinging to a dog who had never ceased searching for him. And then came the documents. Mara had leaked the Helix files anonymously, dispatching them to journalists, whistleblower watchdogs, and congressional aides. Within hours, hashtags began to trend. Hashtag Echo remembers, hashtag Justice for Jude, and most chillingly, hashtag Project Helix. The files exposed everything. Helix had been a top-secret initiative launched under the pretext of wartime rescue, designed to test the emotional synchrony between war-traumatized orphans and genetically enhanced K-9 units. The objective was to create field pairs capable of intuitive, silent communication, ideal for hostile zones. The data, however, painted a darker reality. The children had been isolated, tested, pushed beyond their limits. Many had broken under the pressure, some disappeared without explanation, while others were marked as incompatible and sent to unknown destinations. Jude Harland had been the sole success, paired with Echo in what researchers termed the first perfect imprint. And then came the fire, the lockdown, the order to seal Unit 3B permanently. Lucas stood before the news cameras again, holding a copy of the memo signed by Rhodes. "This is the document that ended a child's life on paper," he stated, his voice raw. "They declared him dead, locked him in, and when that didn't bury the truth, they tried to bury the whole airport." Jude watched from a hospital bed as the world reacted. He said nothing, he didn't need to. The dog curled beside him, never moving, never sleeping too far away, was proof of every memory they had tried to erase. For the first time, the world wasn't turning away. The past was no longer forgotten. It had clawed its way back through one dog and one unbreakable bond. The silence that once suffocated Jude's story was replaced with a roar. Streets filled with protesters holding handmade signs. He waited. Echo knew. No more secrets. The internet became a battlefield of truth. Survivors of other lost programs emerging with their own haunting stories. For every thread that unraveled, another took its place. People weren't merely angry. They were devastated, betrayed, awakened. It wasn't just a cover-up anymore. It was a national reckoning. At the airport gates, hundreds gathered in vigil. Candles lined the fences near Runway 9L, the place where Echo first started digging. Parents brought children, veterans brought service dogs. And at the center of it all, a massive mural began to take shape. An artist painting Echo's face, noble and scarred, with Jude's silhouette beside him, reaching towards the light. Lucas stood at the hospital window, watching the footage play on every news channel. Echo lay at Jude's feet, unmoving but alert. Jude had barely spoken since his rescue, but he didn't need to. His presence was changing everything. Rhodes had been placed in federal custody, but many believed it wasn't enough. Congressional hearings were announced within days. Whistleblower protection laws were invoked. A full investigation into Project Helix was opened. It was only just beginning, but in the quiet of the hospital room, away from the noise and noisemakers, Lucas turned to Mara and asked the question that still kept him awake. Why did my daughter have Jude's photo before she died? Mara didn't answer. She couldn't, because somewhere in the pit of her stomach, she knew the truth hadn't finished revealing itself. Jude's survival wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. And Echo had one more secret left to share. For days, Jude hovered between consciousness and slumber, his body struggling to acclimate to the world from which he had been severed. Physicians were astounded. Malnourished, dehydrated, his lungs barely functioning, yet he had survived. A miracle, they termed it, but everyone understood the reality. It wasn't science that had sustained him. It was Echo. The dog never departed from his side. Not once. He curled at the foot of the hospital bed, alert to every beep, every shift, every breath. Nurses observed how Jude calmed when Echo rested against him, how his heartbeat steadied when Echo whined softly near his ear. Whatever bond they shared, whatever had been forged between them all those years ago, it never fractured. Then one morning, just as the sun crested the horizon, Jude opened his eyes. Not wide, not fearful, but steady. Awake. Mara was the first to notice. She approached gently, uncertain what to say. Jude turned his head slowly, and his cracked voice broke the silence. Where's Echo? Mara smiled, her eyes burning. He's right here. The dog lifted his head instantly, stepping closer, his tail moving gently. Jude stretched out a trembling hand and placed it on Echo's muzzle. You came back, he whispered, tears slipping down his cheeks. I knew you would. Echo responded with a soft grunt, almost a cry. It was the sound of reunion, of memory, of a promise kept. When Lucas entered the room moments later, he froze. Jude looked up at him, not with fear, but with familiarity. His voice was weaker now, but his words were etched in the air. She said you'd come too. Lucas's heart stopped. Who? Jude blinked slowly. The girl. The one who left me the bracelet. She said you'd find me someday. Lucas's hands trembled. That bracelet, the one found buried with Jude's drawings. The one his daughter had worn before she died. Claire. He dropped to his knees beside the bed, emotions colliding all at once. You saw her. Jude nodded faintly. She tried to get to me. She almost did. Lucas swallowed hard, the room spinning. His daughter hadn't just died in a crash. She had died searching for Jude. And somehow, across years and wreckage and silence, she had still helped lead them back to him. The room was now silent, so still it felt hallowed. Lucas sat beside Jude's hospital bed, the bracelet resting in his palm. That small, handmade loop of frayed string and tiny beads. It used to belong to Claire. He recalled her wearing it on her wrist everywhere she went, a gift she had crafted one summer at camp. It held no monetary price, no value except to her. She never removed it, not once. And now Jude possessed it. Lucas looked at him, his voice barely steady. She gave this to you? Jude nodded slowly. She said it was lucky, that if I ever felt alone, it would remind me someone was looking. Tears pricked Lucas's eyes. She found you, didn't she? Jude hesitated, his eyes glazing over with memory. Not all the way. She couldn't get in. She tried. She knew they were hiding me. She snuck in through the side vents. I saw her once through the glass. She was crying. She tried to break the door. Lucas's voice cracked. Why didn't she tell me? Jude answered with a whisper. She was afraid. She said if she told anyone, they'd move me, that you wouldn't believe her. She thought if she found proof, she could bring you back with her. Lucas lowered his head into his hands. It all made sense now. The late nights, the secrecy, the crash report that never fully added up. Claire hadn't been on a random flight that night. She was going to find Jude, and she had nearly succeeded. Mara stepped forward, her face pale with the same realization. She died trying to save him. Lucas nodded, his voice broken. She followed the same trail we did. She was ahead of us the whole time. He gently took Jude's wrist and placed the bracelet back on it. Jude didn't resist. She'd want you to have it, Lucas said. She gave her life trying to make sure you were never alone. Jude closed his eyes, a tear sliding down his cheek. She didn't fail, he whispered, and in that moment, Lucas felt something shift. Not guilt, not grief, but closure. Claire had been the missing thread all along, the one who tied them together, the reason Echo kept digging, the reason the past refused to stay buried. She hadn't been forgotten. She had been guiding them home. The hospital walls had witnessed their share of tragedy, but not moments like this. The cameras were gone, the media outside silenced by the respect this instant demanded. After everything, the tunnels, the cover-up, the lies, and the impossible survival, this room held something no court ruling or public apology could ever offer: family. Jude sat up in bed for the first time unaided, his hands trembling but his eyes clear. He looked smaller than he had before, not because of the weight he'd lost, but because the world finally saw him as he truly was. A child who had been forced to grow up alone, underground, in silence. Mara sat beside him, holding a small stack of papers, custody forms. She had made the decision long before the ink dried. She didn't need permission. Jude was already hers. She handed him a pen. If you want this, if you want to come home with me, you don't have to. But if you do, I'll be here. Always. Jude looked down at the page. Slowly, shakily, he signed his name, the letters uneven, like someone learning to write again. He looked up, and for the first time, he smiled. Lucas stepped forward next, holding something in his hand. A small, folded paper. One of Claire's drawings from when she was younger. A picture of a boy and a dog beneath a tree, surrounded by stars. No names, just the words, "Somewhere, someone waits for you." He placed it beside Jude. "She believed in you. So do I." Jude's hands reached for his, the contact brief but enough. Then he turned to Echo, who had been lying at the foot of the bed. The dog rose as if understanding what came next. Jude leaned down, wrapped his arms around Echo's neck, and whispered, "We have a home now." Outside the room, a nurse wiped away a tear. In a world so full of noise and chaos, this moment, quiet, pure, unguarded, was a reminder that healing didn't always come with sirens or speeches. Sometimes it came with a signature, a second chance, and a promise that this time, he would never be left behind again. A week later, the airport was transformed. What once stood as a symbol of silence and cover-up now became a monument to loyalty, survival, and a bond that defied time. Runway 9L, the very place Echo began digging, the ground where truth had clawed its way to the surface, had been renamed in his honor, Echo Line. The dedication ceremony drew thousands. News anchors stood shoulder to shoulder with veterans, children, survivors, even officials who had once ignored Jude's existence. They came not for politics, not for closure, but to witness a legacy carved in something more powerful than words: devotion. At the center of the tarmac stood a life-sized bronze statue of Echo, one paw raised, eyes locked forward, tail still, as if forever guarding the boy he never gave up on. At his feet, a small plaque read, "He remembered." Jude stood beside Mara, still fragile but stronger now. His skin had color again, his eyes light. He wore a suit that didn't quite fit, his sleeves too long, his shoes borrowed, but none of that mattered. He held Echo's leash like it was made of gold. Lucas was there too, hands in his pockets, watching silently from the edge of the crowd. Not for recognition, but for something deeper. For the moment his daughter's quiet mission became something eternal. When the mayor took the podium, his voice shook. Today we honor a hero. Not a soldier, not a politician, but a German shepherd who never stopped believing that someone was worth saving in a world so quick to forget. Echo remembered. The applause was thunderous. But the loudest moment came not from a speech or a cheer or the sound of jets flying overhead. It came when Jude knelt beside the statue, placed his hand on the cold bronze paw, and whispered something only Echo could hear. And Echo, older now, eyes grayed, body tired, wagged his tail once. Because he knew this wasn't just his day. It was their victory. Following the ceremony, when the crowd had dispersed and the reporters had packed their equipment, Lucas found himself standing alone in the quiet hallway of his home, a worn box tucked under his arm. It was one of the last items he possessed from Claire's room, sealed and untouched since the day she passed. He had never been able to open it until now. He sat on the edge of her bed, the air thick with memory. Inside the box were fragments of her handwriting, photographs of her and Echo when he was a puppy, old drawings, flight maps, and beneath it all, a letter, folded 3 times, sealed with pink tape, and marked in her handwriting. If I don't come back. Lucas's breath caught. His fingers trembled as he unfolded the page. The ink had smudged in places, water damage, perhaps tears, but her words were still there. Dad, I know you won't understand why I had to do this, but I found something. Someone. His name is Jude. He's real. He's down there in the tunnels, the ones nobody talks about. They think no one will believe me, but I know what I saw. I can't walk away. Not if there's a chance to bring him back. And Echo. Echo remembers him. I swear he does. If something happens to me, promise me you'll keep digging. Echo will show you the way. Don't stop. No matter what they say, please find him. Echo will lead you. Lucas folded the letter slowly, his heart in pieces. Everything made sense now. Every sleepless night, every moment she seemed distant. She wasn't lost. She was brave, braver than anyone gave her credit for. He stood up and walked out to the living room where Jude was sketching beside Echo on the floor. Lucas handed him the letter. She left this for us. Jude read it, then placed it gently in his lap. She kept her promise, he whispered, and now we kept hers. In the silence that followed, there was no need for more words, just the sound of a quiet truth that had waited years to be heard. And the girl who lit the path even after she was gone. The morning was hushed, the kind of stillness that felt as though the world were holding its breath. The airport had resumed operations, but runway 9L remained closed for one final hour, a request granted without demur. This time, it was not for repairs, investigations, or silence. It was for something sacrosanct. Jude stood at the runway's edge, the wind brushing through his now fuller hair, the sun warming his skin. He wore a soft hoodie, one of Mara's, and in his hand clutched a single tennis ball, old, worn, but precious. Beside him, Echo sat, older now, his muzzle grayed, yet still alert, his tail gently sweeping the pavement. Mara and Lucas stood a few paces behind, affording him space. They uttered no words. They knew this was not their moment. Jude looked down the endless stretch of tarmac, the place where Echo had first excavated, the place where the earth had finally relinquished its secrets, the place where the silence had ceased. He knelt beside Echo, gently scratched behind his ears, and whispered, "Let's go one more time." Then he stood and threw the ball. It rolled swiftly and far, bouncing erratically across the concrete, heading towards the rising sun. Echo did not move initially. Then his ears pricked, his body straightened, and in a burst of joy that defied his age, he sprinted after it. Jude laughed, a sound that had not existed in his world for so long it felt novel. Echo reached the ball, scooped it in his mouth, and turned back. His pace slowed, not due to age, but because of peace. He walked, not ran, towards the boy he never forgot, tail high, eyes bright. As the two met in the middle of the runway, the sun rose behind them, casting their long shadows in gold. Lucas watched, tears welling again, not from grief, but from awe. A voice echoed in his memory, Claire's words from the letter, "Echo will lead you," and he had, from loss to truth to healing. The world had tried to bury a boy and silence a dog, but neither surrendered. And now they stood together, not broken, not forgotten, found. As Jude held the ball and Echo nuzzled against him, the world watched. Planes waited, hearts paused, because in that moment, on that runway, under that rising sun, hope had returned.